The Silver Chair is the sixth book in the 7 Chronicles of Narnia, written by Clive Staples L, or C.S. Lewis if you prefer. And it's by far the weirdest of the bunch. It's the first without any of the original protagonists, the Pevensey children, or the Pevensey, whichever. It doesn't matter because there's none of them in this book, is what I'm trying to say. But more than that, it's the first that is not explicit about its themes and imagery. Lewis, being Christian, has usually introduced a lot of Christian biblical ideas into Narnia and usually made them very explicit. Everyone immediately recognizes the biblical parallels when he introduces the silver apple in the very first book, The Magician's Nephew, that the witch eats, thus bringing evil to the world of Narnia. In the second book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Aslan sacrifices himself to save the sinner, right? The betrayer, Edmund. And he loses his life in order to satisfy deep magic from the beginning of the world. But then he is returned to life, not 3 days later, but just later in the night, by deeper magic from beyond the beginning of the world. And everyone recognizes, of course, the Christian allegory in that. Everyone recognizes worldly temptation in its many forms throughout the 5th book, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and I could keep giving examples. But what's interesting about The Silver Chair is that it is unlike the other books in that it is not so easily bound to Christian stories or such blatant allegories. First of all, there's the matter of the vehicle of a lot of these allegories, being Aslan himself. He's surprisingly absent for the majority of the story, right? Normally he makes quite a grand appearance and he has words of wisdom, theological wisdom. And Lewis, of course, intended that to help you place Aslan amidst the drama of the human characters, and through that, allow us to place the real God and the real Jesus into the drama of our lives, the readers' lives. And so on that count, it's very literally a Bildungsroman, right? An educational novel. Not only are the characters, the young children, learning about this figure of self-sacrifice, but also the children in real life who are reading this children's book are learning to place that figure in their own lives. Aslan has a lot of this kind of wisdom throughout the books. In the 4th book, Prince Caspian, he says, "I am bigger, not because I grew older, but because you did." And Lucy says, "That doesn't make any fucking sense," so to speak. And and Aslan replies, "Every year you grow, you will find me bigger." It's just right. You will find that more of Aslan, or God as the parallel goes, is revealed to you and necessary to you in different ways as you mature into it. Another example is in the 3rd book, The Horse and His Boy. Aslan says, "I tell you no story but your own. You only have the right to live your own life to the furthest reach of its goodness. And the plan that God sees for you is not yours to see explicitly." And that's one function of faith, to believe that what is correct in God's eyes is more correct than what we expect to be correct through our own eyes. Does that make sense? Like, we ought to see things from, "You must look at yourself through heaven's eyes, la 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 la," as the DreamWorks song goes. Now, when the protagonist of The Horse and His Boy, which is the boy called Shasta, when he hears this, he responds, "Who are you?" Right? Which is a great question. And not in so many words, Aslan gives the sort of boilerplate divine response. He says, "I am that I am." If you could permit a little reading, this is what he actually says. "Myself," said the voice. Maybe I should do the voice. "Myself," said the voice, very deep and low so that the earth shook. And again, "Myself," loud and clear and gay. And then the 3rd time, "Myself," whispered so softly you could hardly hear it, and yet it seemed to come from all round you as if the leaves rustled with it. Right? And so the 3 myselfs, of course, pointing at the Trinity in its own way. So I'd imagine anyway. This video isn't about The Horse and His Boy. It's about the Silver Chair. And the closest that the Silver Chair gets to this kind of theology, let's say, with regards to Aslan, is to Jill Pole, the female lead of the story. He says to her, "I have swallowed up girls and boys, women and men, kings and emperors, cities and realms." Now, you could well describe time or death in the same way, but describing Aslan as such seems to limit him a fair amount. You have to wonder what Lewis wants to say by doing so, because he seems to reduce Aslan's godliness to the product of time, rather than its source, as I think he would have wanted to argue. And even then, right, that point of view was directly contradicted by the fact of Caspian returning to youth at the end of the story, right, when he's washed with Aslan's blood. It seems like it's an incongruence and basically nonsensical story detail that doesn't connect these two facets of Aslan within the same story. So it seems like very clumsy writing. The first and the only that you really come to notice in the Narnia series out of the 7 books, it's this one that is the most weird. This is the first wrong book in the Chronicles of Narnia, wrong with a capital W. And this incongruency about Aslan is the first wrong thing about the silver chair. Once again, with a capital W. The next really wrong thing is the matter of Aslan's signs, right? This duty that he assigns to Jill and her friend Eustace Scrubb of having to go into the Narnian wilds, essentially wandering around looking for these signs that will lead them to the abducted Prince Rilian, whom they will have to save and return to Narnia. The problem, though, is that the signs that he gives are very, very, very vague. So vague that Aslan himself recognizes that these children will probably forget them, and he has Jill Pole constantly reciting the signs over and over again until the point of memorization. But of course, these are children, so they keep flubbing on them, right? They're supposed to meet with Prince Rilian's father, King Caspian, but they don't know he's gotten old, so they don't recognize him and they miss their opportunity. So that's one sign, gone out the window, completely useless, and only because Aslan wasn't specific enough. Aslan says there's a stone plaque at the ruined city of giants that they have to read, but they fail to realize that the plaque is designed for giants, so they fail to read it until, once again, they miss their opportunity, and only because, once again, Aslan wasn't specific enough. Now, it's often been argued, especially keeping in mind the presence of Christian allegories throughout Narnia, that this is all a metaphor for the hiddenness of God and the necessity of faith, right, and of good practicing in the belief of God, right? Pole has to grow out of her complacency on the matter. In this case, spiritual complacency. She has to learn from a character like her companion, Puddleglum, who does indeed have a very deep, abiding faith in Aslan, even though he's a complete pessimist. And in fact, the interesting thing about that is because he's a pessimist, because he always thinks things are going to go wrong, whenever he says, well, I'm sure Aslan will help us get there, you feel like he is expressing a lot more spiritual maturity and a lot more gratitude than our protagonists, Jill Pole and Eustace Scrubb, are. And this interpretation of Jill having to learn and grow out of her spiritual complacency, I think that's a really splendid interpretation, and it's a correct one, by and large. Lewis is essentially writing a mythological counter-argument, right? It's a narrative illustration of the consequences of the deadly sin sloth, if you're into animals. And that's fair, but it's at odds with the rest of the chronicles on Aslan's role, right? Where he seems to not only be present, but personal to the story, right? He's a character in his own right, and he talks to these people directly, right? And compared to that deus ex machina feeling, a sort of comforting sense of fatherhood that Aslan embodies in the other chronicles, there's something so cold and empty here that propels it out of an allegory or, just a spiritual educational book, a Bildungsroman. Now, you're probably expecting me to tell you what that something is, but honestly, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. There just is something weird about this story that I can't place. And further still, there's this focus on the silver chair, right? Which is a trivial plot element, all told. Like, there's really nothing important going on with the silver chair, but it is nonetheless the title of the story. Why is it the title of the story? Once again, I don't know. The Green Witch enchanted it with some magic that is never really explained, and nor is it quite functional in the first place. Every night for 10 years, the prince has had to be tied to this chair in order to run this illusion over him, right, to control him. And she never, in a decade, figured out a better way to do it. And this is something of a motif in the witch's magic, like it's really very shit. There's so many little catches to its ability to function. Probably because it's reshaping reality itself, which is kind of a fragile thing to do. Normally, reality tends to reassert itself in the long run. So, obviously, that's going to be quite a struggle to do. But, if you need examples, take when her squire, right, her knight, who is Prince Rilian himself when he's been brainwashed, he can't speak when he's above ground, right? This Green Witch is the queen of the underworld, and so normally they live underground. But when she comes overground with her knight, with Rilian in tow, he can't speak, otherwise her control of him disappears. And you think, well, what a perfect opportunity. What if Rillian happened to say something? Wouldn't that completely scupper all of her plans? And it's like, yes, it would. But yet, he never speaks. He doesn't speak. The very fact of how easy it would have been points to some sort of complicitness. Not in Rillian as such. I'm not victim blaming here. But in fate, if you will. Simple as it would have been to break the spell, nothing ever arose to challenge him enough to try in the first place. And this is contrasted later with another very sort of elaborate magic ritual that the characters just let happen to them, right? Where the Green Witch throws some kind of powder in the fireplace, and then that makes them all drowsy. And then she plays some really dreary music on her sitar, essentially, sort of like Muriel in Courage the Cowardly Dog. And she uses that to silence their thoughts. And at any point, they could just go, well, this is ridiculous. This is silly. And they could walk out, but nothing really challenges them to. And they permit themselves almost to fall into that slumber. Eventually, Puddleglum, bless his soul, has this great speech where he says, his reality, what he knows of reality, of the beautiful sun, of Aslan's glory, is much more worthwhile than what the witch says is real, which is that he knows only the lantern and only the cat, from which she says he derived these more beautiful things. And he responds, well, that may be, that may be, I don't know. Your magic is very powerful, and he doesn't say this, but essentially this is what we're supposed to understand. Your magic is very powerful, and yeah, you might have driven all memory of those beautiful things from me, but I know that there was a beauty like that, and I'd rather believe in that beautiful story over the ugly reality that you present. And so saying, he stamps out the fire that was sending out this drowsy smoke. And he burns his foot in the process, but it's better than believing the witch, who was in any case lying. So that's really what I'm trying to say is confusing here, is that on the one hand, there is a magic spell like the one that is on Rillian, which could have been easily broken, but it never was. And on the other hand, despite all of this rigmarole that the Green Witch went into in order to put these guys to sleep, it just took Puddleglum the bravery to say, nah, bitch, nah. To overthrow that magic. Pardon the language there. I appreciate Narnia is a children's book. What we get from the witch's weaker magic is a sort of juxtaposition that forms between Aslan's magic versus the witch's. And I said before that Aslan knows and can invoke deeper magic from beyond the beginning of time. And just by name alone, you can sort of tell that compared to this smoke and illusions type of magic that the Green Witch uses, Aslan's magic is of a completely different level. But also you can tell from the fact that the Green Witch's magic is ugly, right? Both in motivation and in effect. There's, of course, the dreary music, the boring music, and the overwhelming smoke. But more than that, everyone she enslaves, right? All of these underlings that she controls, they have a billion different characteristics among them. And Lewis points out, like, some of them have different ears, some of them have 10 toes, some of them have 10 toes on each foot, some of them have no toes at all. Some of them have only one eye, etc., etc. But the one thing that they all have in common is that they all have the same sad expression on their faces. Her magic has only one serious effect, and it's to make these people ugly, right? Unattractive. It's an empty, reductive kind of magic, versus Aslan's magic that we've seen throughout the Chronicles of Narnia is liberating. It gives you strength and character, as we see, through Eustace and Dawntreader, Edmund in Lion, Witch and Wardrobe, and within Silverchair itself, Puddleglum and Caspian, and more metaphorically, Rillian. They find themselves and they become stronger because of it. Better people because of it. That's the power of Aslan's magic. And that does seem to untangle some of the confusion that this text is loaded with, right? We can read it as a battle between two magics, one being an empty, draining magic that really has no strength. Every night needs to be reaffirmed despite your wrestling with it. That fights against reality itself and tries to bend it in its image. And meanwhile, there's this other kind of magic that is the very essence of reality itself, right? That lets us acknowledge beauty and joy as being above us, but nonetheless, things that are part of us. It's magical in the sense that it seems supernatural. And in a way it is, right? After all, nature cannot say of itself that it is beautiful. It needs perception, right? Conscious perception. It needs consciousness to say so. And that's the core of Aslan's magic. But, even so, it's not like Aslan comes roaring down into Narnia, or directly into the Green Witch's castle, to reveal his magic and how much better it is. No. The hard work is all Puddleglums, and Jill Poles, and Eustace Scrubs, and Prince Rillians, right? They have to be the ones to have this spiritual force to fight back against the Green Witch's magic. That's just another way of saying what I've already said, which is that the story, The Silver Chair, is just an articulation of the fight against sloth, right? Of having a vigilant faith in the nature of God and the power of God. But as I already explained, that isn't relevant in Narnia because that's not the character of Aslan, right? Aslan is the figure who we fully expect to come roaring down, but he never does, and that's the weirdest part of The Silver Chair. It's just such a crazy text that refuses or fails to answer what it's driving at. Like, what's the hidden thing that Lewis expects his readers, children though they may be, to derive from this quite creepy story? What do we get from exploring the underground realm? Is that some analogy of hell? Or is Lewis hinting at some parallel to Plato's cave and the idea that the real world, the world above ground, Aslan's world, it can be lost, right? Replaced for just its images or symbolic meaning over the thing itself. How is it that so many living things keep falling down there, and why do they all sleep when they get down there? Why will they wake at the end of the world? What's the deal with that? How did Father Time fall down there? Does Father Time have any relation to the idea of Aslan seeming to take on time when he described himself earlier? There are no distinct answers to these questions. And I've read through The Silver Chair over and over again. It's not really helped at all. But at least it's a very fun story, and it's a very moving story as well. And nonetheless, the themes that I have so far derived regarding sloth, regarding the nature of Aslan's magic, I think they are still very important to learn about the nature of spirituality. So I recommend it greatly. It's frustrating, but that's really all I have to say. So I'm going to wrap the video up there. I do want to keep these Guild Wars 2 content creator videos quite short. Because I know my audience isn't quite interested in Guild Wars 2 related topics. So what I'm gonna do... Wait, did I talk about Guild Wars 2? I didn't talk about Guild Wars 2 at all, did I? So what the fuck am I calling this a Guild Wars 2 content creator video for? Shit, I guess I'll have to talk about Guild Wars 2. But I need some kind of segue. I can't just start talking about Guild Wars 2. From Narnia? I need some kind of transition from the world of Narnia to the world of Tyria that is as smooth, convenient as the wardrobe. I don't know what it should be though. Should I keep it relevant to The Silver Chair, or should I just talk about the Chronicles more generally? Something as broad as Narnia has magic, and Tyria has magic too. Look at all these ley lines. Fuck that. I hate the ley lines so much. Such retarded writing. Classic Guild Wars 2. I don't know. There's a green witch who can turn into a snake. I literally can't think of anything like that in Guild Wars 2. She lives in a castle. It's underground. She has gremlins. Gremlins? That's not a Guild Wars 2 thing. I don't know why I suddenly got excited. There are mole people in Guild Wars 2 that live underground, but honestly, dredge lore sounds like the most boring fucking thing I can make a video on. So no, that's not happening. Prince Rillian. There's no princes in Guild Wars 2. Isn't that lame for a fantasy story when you don't have a prince? God, I hate Guild Wars 2 so much. There's King Caspian. There's also no kings in Guild Wars 2. Aslan is a lion. There is Lion's Arch, but I have literally nothing to say about Lion's Arch. Silver Chair? Silver? Should I make a documentary on silver ore prices over the years on the Black Lion Trading Company? That would be, that's... God, that would be some nerdy shit. That's how you get nerd cred. Alright. Silver chair. Chair? Guild Wars 2 is well known for its excellent role-playing features. From its expansive fantasy world to its wide breadth of emotes, players can easily make themselves feel like they're living in Tyria. It's no surprise then that we love sitting on chairs, and of course, we have our favorites. Here are our top 7 chairs in Guild Wars 2, and be sure to stick around for our recommendation of 2 chairs we'd love to see in game. At the bottom of the list, we have this fucking piece of shit chair, which, thanks devs, already has some dickhead sitting on it. Why the fuck would you give us a chair that we can't sit on if you're already putting someone there? What's the point of goddamn fucking chairs if you're gonna put people on them so that we can't sit down? And secondly, this fucking chair is a reference to Critical Role, right? So it even has dialogue, like you can talk with the chair, for fuck's sakes. It has dialogue, and all it does is it just name drops all this shit as if that's enough to entertain someone. Like just reading the words Whitestone is supposed to be fucking hilarious. Ha ha ha, that's where Percival Frederickstein von Mussel Kowalski de Rollo III comes from. OMG, this is quality content. Hey look, that's a reference to the Druid Keyleth. Isn't this worth my money? And hey, surprise! They said the word grog, which is a reference to the character Not from Campaign 2, who is an alcoholic, because Tony learns from his mistakes. Wow, that's so clever. Fuck off. I want a chair to sit on, not a goddamn reference. I hate references.
I hate meta.
Number 6, we have a rock. A fucking rock. You don't even sit on the rock, you just pose like a loser at a convention. What the I don't think the devs know that the most basic definition of a chair is something that you sit on. Good grief. Well, moving on at number 5, we have chairs you can sit on. Also, you have to buy them from the in-game store. Fucking hell. No wonder people don't believe in capitalism anymore, when the best thing they can spend their fucking capital on is this flaming garbage. Fuck's sakes, what the fuck is the point of buying a virtual chair? None of these even look good. Okay, here's a G word the devs ought to look up. Gaudy. Fucking hell, these are ugly. I wouldn't be paid to have these on my account. And if you're thinking of buying these, here's an idea. Go buy a book, you fucking nerd. Number 4, the raid chairs. Raids are shit. Raid chairs are shit. But at least they're free, and you can fucking sit on them. Number 3, this fucking bench. Nice relaxing place. In the midnight of the mists, you can hear the fountain play behind you as you gaze out at the view of the starry expanse and wonder, why do we fall in love? Who are we? Where will we go? Why am I facing the fountain? And even then, my view is blocked by this ugly fucker. It's okay, this button will face me the right. No, it won't. It just moves me from looking at his ass to his face. Alright, well, it says a lot about the other chairs that this is still the 3rd best chair in Guild Wars 2. Let me get back in character. Number 2, the throne at Holbrack. Ever need to stoke your ego? Well, now you can look down at your domain from the top of the massive lodge of the Norn capital. Are you fucking kidding me? It's a chair. Let me sit on the fucking chairs, you fucking 3rd-rate World of Warcraft reject developers. I hope your dogs get skinned and turned into a leather chair, and that you get gorilla glue to the chair, and you learn what it means to sit on a fucking chair. Fuck you, game. I do what I want. We'll get to the best chair in Guild Wars 2 very soon, but first, we have a word from our sponsor, the Chairs Company. The Chairs Company is dedicated to bringing you the very best chairs from the very best chairs makers around the world. It's a one-stop shop for all your chairs-related needs, whether it's for gaming or for sitting or for standing up from. There's no better chairs than the ones you'll find at the Chairs Company. Browse the lowest deals for the best chairs at the Chairs Company online storefront catalog.com, and your backside will thank you. Use the coupon code CHAIRS at checkout, that's CHAIRS chairs, for 3% off your first order and a free chairs leg on us. That's coupon code CHAIRS at the Chairs Company online storefront catalog.com for a deal you don't want to miss. for chairs you love to fucking sit on, you retarded developers. Number one is the chair, by the way, the basic chair that you get for sitting on all the other chairs. You can face it wherever you want and sit down and stand up wherever you want. It's free, you can sit on it, it's a chair. Turns out that's all this game needed. But I guess greed speaks louder than sense. What did you think of our list? Do you agree or disagree? Be sure to tell us in the comments and let us know what chairs you'd like to see in-game. Our first recommendation is the armor-plated chair. If you've listened to T-Rex's self-titled debut LP, you'll know their rock-and-rolling album opener, Metal Guru, mentions an armor-plated chair. Doesn't that sound perfect for Guild Wars 2? Just be sure to save a character called Metal Guru before the armor-plated chair enters the game. And our second recommendation is The Silver Chair is the fourth book written by C.S. Lewis, or Clive Staples L, if you prefer, from the 7 Chronicles of Narnia. Now, it's not my favorite, but it is pretty cool, and I do like talking about it. And if you don't know what you're looking for, if you don't know what to expect, the story looks like kind of a mess, right? Aslan looks really uninvolved throughout. He gets a couple of kids and a frogman to wander around, almost get eaten by giants, stumble into an evil underground kingdom, almost get killed by a green witch who can Jafar into a snake, all without any idea what on earth they were supposed to be looking for, and if they fail to find it, then the whole of Narnia falls to ruin and chaos without a king. So good job, Aslan. But look at this image that I just found. Just the way that this image looks like a clutter of noise at first. If you know how to look at it, the image suddenly turns into something with depth. Like literally, because it has a 3D effect. In this case, it's a shark that I stole from the video game Gone Home. The trick is to point your eyes, if that makes sense. Like look at something, some distance behind the image, but you focus your eyes on the image itself. And when you do that, the true 3D image renders as an optical illusion. What's happening is you create 2 separate images for your left and right eye because they're not looking at the same point on the image, so they're slightly offset. And then that turns the image into a stereo image, right? It's a stereoscopy. I'm just going to pretend that's the word and I'm using it correctly. And in just that way, when you're reading The Silver Chair, if you simply focus on the story itself, you kind of just go, what the huh? But what you want to do is you want to focus on King Caspian. He has 2 very important scenes. One is when he appears very briefly at the start, and the other is when he appears very briefly at the end, right? 2 images producing a stereoscopy. I don't even know if that word exists. Now, in his second appearance, which is at the end, he's triumphant, he's glorious, he's full of divine purpose, he's brimming with the magic of Aslan. But in his first appearance at the start, he's an old man with nowhere to turn to. He's abandoning his kingdom in despair, having lost his wife and child. What happened in between? Well, nothing much, actually. He's told that his son is returned, and he reunites with his son. And also he dies. That's important, I guess. But what happens to him plays second fiddle to his attitude on both counts. What's important is that the story is bookended by these 2 departures of King Caspian from the port at Cair Paravel, right? The second is, of course, his death, where the music is so morose that it transcends the place, and even as Aslan carries him to heaven, to Aslan's country, the music follows him there. It's a bittersweet swell of emotion as the decade-long parting of father and son is finally brought to an end, only to be replaced by another separation of the 2. And it's a harsher separation, but a natural separation. And there lies the crux of the story. The first departure from Cair Paravel is an unnatural undertaking on Caspian's part. In the previous story, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Caspian has already been told by Aslan that the journey to Aslan's country is not his to make, because he has a duty to his nation and to his people. But in the despair of losing his heir, right, of knowing that his nation and his people are now doomed, in despair, Caspian decides to undertake that unnatural journey in mockery of a journey that he ought to make stripped of despair, the journey to Aslan's country, to heaven. He ought to be content with it, but instead he is full of despair. It's a metaphor for a suicidal act. And I think this word mockery is important because every facet of that early scene at Cair Paravel evokes that very word, mockery. The grief is artificial. The crowd weep at first, but Lewis presents them later as people coming away from watching a game or a race. They're sort of ambivalent to the whole notion that the king is leaving without an heir, which means what? The whole nation is going to collapse and fall? That it's completely nonsensical. Compare this to the end, where the people, they can't even cheer the fact that the father and son are reuniting because they know that Caspian is at death's door, right? They know this is something more real, more profound. The speech that Caspian gives at the start is incomprehensible because he's old and he has nothing important to say. So essentially your average Joe Biden speech. But at the end of the story, at the end of the book, when he can't speak, when he's in his son's arms, turns out words weren't really necessary at all. These twin images are such a beautiful parallel of what it really means to embrace Aslan's magic, what is real, what is necessary, what is beautiful, what is joyful, what stops you from losing hope, that you recontextualize the rest of the silver chair by using this contrast between the two, by using this stereoscopy. And it all boils down to this word, mockery. It might not answer all of the Silver Chair's questions. In fact, it can't, because the Silver Chair, I still contend, is a very complicated book. But at least I think it'll give us some strong hints. So let's follow through. Mockery. The dichotomy of magics is not between the Green Witch's magic versus Aslan's magic, but rather Aslan's magic versus the things, the people, our choices that make a mockery of it. And of course we make mockery of it. Like, think of what Caspian had to face. Fear, despair, loneliness, anger, right? It's a lot easier to run away and scorn the things that say, hey, no, you're strong enough to face them, than it is to say, hey, yeah, you're right. And you know what, Aslan, I'm sure Aslan knows what's up. I'm sure he gave me all of these terrifying things because he knows I can deal with them. Of course, there is something comforting in that second line of thoughts, but no amount of comfort will give you the strength, the courage to actually fight that fear and despair. Especially as in Caspian's case, you've been waiting 10 years for some sign that Rillian is coming back, that your son is coming back. We mock it because we feel it has mocked us. But the only things that mock us are of our own creation, right? And this is brought to light by something that Lewis has Jill Pole say. So she's been given these signs by Aslan to guide her on her journey. And at one point she says, bother the signs. And in response to that, he has this whole paragraph of narration, which basically psychoanalyzes her motivation to spite Aslan's signs in this way. And Lewis, I think, has a very acute sense of the human mind. His book, The Screwtape Letters, is essentially a work of psychology written as satire. The German name for this book is particularly apt, as German names tend to be. It's called Die Instanweisung für einen Unterteufel, or Instructions to a Devil. And that's exactly what it is. It's a work of psychology, informing us of how we think through the lens of devils giving us those thoughts. Right? And Lewis does something similar here for the moment when Jill Pole says, bother the signs. Here's what he writes. As you see, she had gotten the order wrong. Well, that was because she had given up saying the signs over every night. She still really knew them, if she troubled to think, but she was no longer so pat in her lesson as to be sure of reeling them off in the right order at a moment's notice and without thinking. Puddleglum's question annoyed her because, deep down inside her, she was already annoyed with herself for not knowing the lion's lesson quite so well as she felt she ought to have known it. This annoyance, added to the misery of being very cold and tired, made her say, bother the signs. She didn't perhaps quite mean it. And I think this is one of the most important moments in the book, because it spells out the origin of all what I've been calling mockery, right? In a more classically Christian sense, you might call it pride, or as I mentioned before, sloth as well. But essentially, that final sentence is the key to it all. She didn't perhaps quite mean it. Well, of course we don't mean it. We know what beauty is. We know what goodness is. We know what trust is. We have faith in them all the time. We love them all the time. It's why we can be moved by them. If not to actions of great heroism, then at least actions of minor heroism. We make small sacrifices in the name of these things all the time because we know them to be greater than us. But sometimes the resentment bubbles over and we just care to spite the things that we love the most until it comes back to haunt us. As Jill, Eustace, and Puddleglum themselves learned when they realized the very trenches they'd gone into were the letters, the giant letters they needed to read to tell them where to go. Well, of course they felt regret then, because the very thing that they'd spited for being useless and for distracting them and keeping them in the cold, that was exactly where they needed to go. Obviously, that's far from the only example of mockery in this text. The Green Witch herself is a walking symbol of mockery, right? She takes the rightful prince of Narnia and then returns him to his throne as a usurper by controlling his mind, right? She makes mockery of princehood by making the prince act like a pompous buffoon. She takes people from the deepest reaches of the world and makes mockery of their underground dwelling by having them live in a shallow underworld. She makes mockery of hospitality by having the giants host a feast in which their guests are the main course, and indeed they fatten them up by feeding them their own Narnian brothers, a talking stag specifically. She makes mockery of individuality when all her servants have all the same expression on their faces despite their many physical differences. She makes mockery of Aslan and Narnia by pretending they never existed, by asserting that it was a pleasant dream the overworlders imagined, dreamed up from such trivial things as lanterns and cats. Her magic is a mockery of Aslan's real magic. She uses powders and incantations and puffs of smoke and music and ceremony. But right at the start, one of the first things Eustace says is, I don't think Aslan would like those things. All those circles and inscriptions are rather rot. And of course, she makes mockery of motherhood, ladyship, chivalry, love, in her relationship with Rilian, and how his false affection for her is a mockery of his real affection for the mother whom she killed. From there, I think we can establish why The Silver Chair is the title of this book. Because the object, the silver chair, is such a fragile, shitty thing that Rilian breaks with a single sword blow, and yet it is the only reason that the plot ever happens, because everyone keeps getting duped by something just as weak and shitty and fragile as this silver chair. But because of the weakness in our souls, we keep getting pulled towards it. Every night we are deluded by our own mockeries of more beautiful things. And of our own volition, we sit on that chair, believing it to be good for us. And every night we keep ourselves further from Aslan's magic, from what is real and beautiful. And sometimes we just gotta make like Puddleglum and say, I don't care if this is real. This place sucks fucking ass. And I'd rather believe in a beautiful dream than something you tell me is true. And we just have to stomp that fire out. And we just have to tear that silver chair asunder. Whether it's laziness, or pornography, or overeating, or video games. We all have a sin. A silver chair which we will sit on and pretend that we are content with the world that we paint over our eyes. Well, that's why Aslan doesn't show up. Because you have to want him to show up. But the moment you want him to, then not only will he show up, but he is showing up, and he has showed up. It's in your ability to recognize and break free from those distortions of beauty that he has appeared, that he has worked his magic. And Aslan says so himself. This is where he really describes himself in this book. He says, "You would not have called to me." That is, you couldn't have broken free from this unless I had been calling to you. This is the allegory that Lewis has written for the silver chair. Aslan has already given you everything you need, everything you want in this life and the next. You just have to learn to want them. There's this image that he writes near the end of the land beneath the underworld, a place called Bism, right? And one of the gremlins that had been enslaved by the Green Witch is about to return to Bism, and he invites Rillian to come with him. He says this, "In Bism, the diamonds are alive. You only see up on the surface the dead diamonds that are dull and stuck in one shape. But we have living diamonds and rivers of diamonds." And as a reader, again, if you're focusing on the wrong thing, right? If you don't have that stereoscopy in mind, you'll think, well, okay, that's just another weird thing that Lewis wrote in this very weird story. But if you have King Caspian in mind, you will recall his death. More importantly, his revivification in Aslan's country, when he is returned not only to his youth, but to his fullness of everything he could have been and everything he ought to have been. Not a mockery, he is perfected. And then you think back to the diamonds and you think, well, he was a dead diamond as we saw him in this world. He was dull and stagnant. But when he goes to that deeper world, then he is a living diamond. He is all of his beauty at once. Through that lens, you realize that life itself is a mockery of the life to come, the eternal life, when there is nothing we can desire that is wrong, with a capital W, of course. And Caspian himself learns that. In that place, all of our being is directed to purity and goodness and virtue and love. And it's in pursuit of that life beyond that we remember, even in this world of mockery, that there is love. Lewis is saying that no matter how tempted we are to succumb to fear and despair, to believe that the world is only what we see and not the beauty we would like to see in it, there is all the same a deeper voice within us that knows beauty can come, will come, that knows we are being pulled to it. Aslan said, "I have swallowed up girls and boys, women and men, kings and emperors, cities and realms." Well, he's not talking about time. He's talking about love. He's talking about that unplaceable desire to escape from our own mockeries, to find something even truer, even more beautiful, even more worthy of adoration and love than the fallen world we see with our eyes. He's asking us to destroy our fears for the sake of that beautiful place where all things are as they ought to be. No mockeries anymore. Well, he can ask you all he wants. But you have to stomp on that fire. You have to destroy the silver chair.